No one prepares you for this, but when you disappear without explanation, something much deeper happens on the other side. It's not just bewilderment, it's not just curiosity, it's a silent collapse of psychological control. While common sense insists that disappearing is immature, Machiavelli understood centuries ago that absence, when well positioned, is one of the purest forms of power. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals. You don't need to argue, explain, justify, or defend yourself. The end justifies the means when the goal is to reposition value. And here's the unsettling statement: people don't miss those who speak beautifully. They miss those who disappear at the right moment. When you leave without warning, you force the other person to confront questions that don't have quick answers. And this activates deep mechanisms of the human mind. In this video, you'll understand the 7 inevitable reactions that arise when you disappear without explanation. Not as an emotional game, but as a psychological strategy based on real human nature. If you've ever been underestimated, taken for granted, or lost value by always being available, this isn't entertainment. It's repositioning. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul. An invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. When you disrupt the consistency of your presence, the first impact isn't anger, it's pure disorientation. They wake up expecting what has always been there and find an unexpected emptiness. The human mind, guided by true human nature, hates silent ruptures. There was no fight, no explanation, no drama, and that breaks the script. That's where politics guided by reality, not ideals, comes in, something Machiavelli understood well. The unexpected absence is more unsettling than any direct confrontation, because confrontation gives shape to chaos, while silence spreads it. At that moment, you cease to be a person and become a variable. They feel as if something normal has been taken away without warning. It's not nostalgia yet. It's confusion. It's like opening an app that always worked and seeing only a blank screen. The mind tries to update, restart, understand the mistake. And the less you react, the more their internal system malfunctions. This is not cruelty. It is the calculated use of psychological force. The shock doesn't come from the disappearance itself, but from the disruption of predictability. At this point, something curious happens. His absence begins to occupy more space than his presence did. Their brains were trained through repetition, and you deviated from the pattern without warning. Machiavelli would call this virtù and fortuna in action. Preparation meets opportunity. You didn't need to raise your voice or explain anything. The mere act of withdrawing already communicates power, because those who are always available are not perceived as essential. This is where, in practice, one understands the principle that it is better to be feared than loved, without needing to be hated. The fear here isn't panic, it's a loss of control. They don't know where you are emotionally, and that's destabilizing. Whoever controls the predictability controls the pace. You left the game without announcing your departure, and this forces the other side to play alone. Absence becomes an invisible mirror, still without form. There was no attack, but there was an impact, and a silent impact always echoes further. Here's a simple example. When someone disappears from a WhatsApp group without saying anything. At first, everyone pretends not to notice. Then someone asks, "Have you seen so-and-so?" Doubt spreads, even without an answer. This is the appearance of virtue being dismantled by silence. You didn't accuse, you didn't demand, you didn't justify. You simply withdrew energy. In the logic of having your own loyal armies, you withdrew your troops. And when someone is gathering troops, something serious is happening. They begin to sense that something has changed, but they don't know what. This is the moment when control begins to slip from their hands. You're not punishing, you're repositioning yourself. And repositioning is more confusing than a frontal attack. The other person's ego doesn't understand yet, but it already feels it. This initial discomfort is just the beginning, because soon after, their minds will demand answers, and that's when the real interrogation begins. After the initial shock, their minds go into investigative mode. The silence that was once merely strange has now become unsettling. The questions start coming uninvited, one after the other. What happened? Did I do something wrong? Why did he disappear like that? The human mind, guided by decisions based on true human nature, hates loopholes. When there is no external explanation, the brain creates an internal tribunal, and in that court, they are judge, defendant, and prosecutor all at the same time. Machiavelli understood that constant doubt is more detrimental than harmful certainty, because certainty closes things off, but doubt corrodes. You didn't say anything, but you forced me to think. That is the power of those who act with politics guided by reality, not by ideals. There was no direct attack, but there was psychological displacement. They begin revisiting old conversations in search of clues. Every sentence spoken becomes potential evidence. Silence transforms trivial details into enormous suspicions. At this stage, their ego tries to protect their own image. Nobody likes to admit that they were disposable or predictable. Then the questions take on a more defensive tone. Is he trying to manipulate me? Is this a game? This is where the conflict arises between the appearance of virtue and reality, because admitting you've lost value hurts more than devising a strategy. Machiavelli already warned, the ego prefers convenient narratives to the stark truth. By remaining silent, you force the other person to deal with it. There is no validation, no emotional closure, and without closure, the mind goes into a loop. They begin to observe their own past behavior. Ignored messages, delays, minor oversights, things that once seemed normal are now gaining importance. The interrogation is no longer about you, and it starts to be about them. This is where silence reveals its calculated use of force. You don't accuse, but allow your conscience to do the hard work, and consciousness without anesthesia is uncomfortable. They wonder if they were too predictable. They took his presence for granted. They erred by being too comfortable. In the logic of virtu and fortuna, you left before luck turned against you. This breaks down the invisible hierarchy that existed, because those who question lose ground. Whoever begs for an explanation loses control, and those who are left without an answer lose even more. You don't justify yourself, therefore you don't lower yourself. This reinforces the feeling that something important has been lost. The internal questioning intensifies. And the more he grows, the more a dangerous hunger for resolution is born. After the internal interrogation, something even more uncomfortable emerges. The urgent need to bring the story to a close. Their minds can't stay open for very long. The silence, which used to be confusing, is now starting to become physically unsettling. It's a hunger for explanation, not for reconciliation. They want to understand in order to regain control. Machiavelli knew that whoever controls the ending controls the narrative. Therefore, the end justifies the means when the goal is to alleviate internal anxiety. They start to consider sending a message just to understand. It's not longing, it's discomfort. It's an attempt to reorganize the mental chaos. The absence has become a problem with no apparent solution, and unresolved problems drain emotional energy. Here, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, comes into play again. You don't offer a solution because you don't need to. Those who need it are those who stayed behind. At this point, their mind begins to negotiate with itself. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. The search for closure becomes an internal agreement. They rehearse messages that they never send. They reread, erase, and rewrite. That's not courage. It's a dependence on closure. Machiavelli would say that here, many lose power through haste, because those who seek explanations gain an advantage. By remaining silent, you practice calculated use of force. It's not aggressive, it's strategic. Continuous absence turns you into a fixed point of reference. Everything starts to revolve around your lack of response. The desire for resolution grows precisely because there is no friction. There is no fight to justify the end. There is only emptiness begging for form. Here's a common example: when someone insists on talking to close the loop. Most of the time, the cycle is already closed, except for those who have lost control. The request to talk is an attempt to rebalance the emotional hierarchy, and those who concede too quickly lose ground. This is where the principle of avoiding being hated without giving up firmness comes in. You don't humiliate, you don't expose, you don't accuse. It simply doesn't deliver what the other person wants. This maintains its appearance of virtue while sustaining power. The eagerness for a resolution turns into frustration. Frustration turns into a need for internal explanation. And when the explanation doesn't come from the outside, it will be created from within. This is the moment when their minds start inventing stories. Stories to soothe the ego, narratives to protect one's own image. And so, without realizing it, they enter the myth-making phase. When resolution doesn't come, the mind does what it always does to survive. It creates stories. Human beings need meaning, even if it's invented. At that point, they are no longer seeking the truth. They seek relief for their wounded ego. Machiavelli understood well how narratives shape power. Those who cannot control the facts try to control their interpretation. Absence creates fertile ground for speculation. He must be playing a game. This is manipulation. He's always been like this. These stories aren't about you. They talk about their inability to cope with the loss of control. Here, decisions are based on real human nature. The ego prefers an imaginary villain to accepting its own negligence. It's more comfortable to believe that you acted on calculation, rather than admit that you were underestimated. Myths are born to protect self-esteem. These narratives begin small, almost harmless, but they grow as they are repeated internally. Each old memory is reinterpreted through a new lens. Neutral gestures become hidden signals. Ancient silences become clues. This is where their appearance of virtue comes into play. They present themselves as mature, rational, and understanding. While they portray you as cold, calculating, or indifferent, Machiavelli already warned, people need to appear to be right, not to be right. This construction protects both public and private image. Nobody likes to see themselves as disposable. Then the myth becomes a shield. You become a character, not a person. And the characters don't respond. They don't explain. The myth grows precisely because you don't confront it. The curious thing is that the more they talk about you internally, the more present you become. Even when you're absent, you take up space. This is the paradox of a well-placed absence. You don't fight for the narrative. He neither corrects nor defends himself. This is the calculated use of force in its purest form. Because by not reacting, you allow the myth to inflate, and inflated myths eventually collapse. They begin to notice contradictions in their own stories. Nothing dates completely. Something is always left over, an unsettling feeling that perhaps it's not quite like that. The myth is starting to crack. And when it cracks, the obsessive thoughts intensify. That's when you stop being merely remembered and start being felt as a ghostly presence. When myths begin to crumble, something deeper happens. You cease to be merely a rational idea. It becomes a recurring emotional presence. They don't think about you because they want to. They wonder why their minds couldn't file you away. You appear in random memories without warning. A song, a place, a common phrase. Everything can become a trigger. Machiavelli knew that what is not resolved returns with double the force. The absence now becomes a psychological burden. There is no hatred yet. There is mental insistence. You become an unresolved variable. This is a consequence of decisions based on real human nature. The brain hates invisible endings. At this stage, you no longer need to do anything. The hard work is happening by itself. Their minds begin to create imaginary dialogues, conversations that never happened, answers you never gave, scenarios where everything would be different. This phenomenon is not nostalgia. It's an attempt at retroactive control. Machiavelli would call this a loss of strategic position, because those who revisit the past are trying to correct the present. You, in silence, maintain a calculated use of force. There is no attack, there is no persecution, only sustained absence. And sustained absence creates gravity. Everything starts to revolve around her. See how this plays out in practice. They check social media, even without a clear intention. They reread old messages by chance. They ask about you to third parties in a disguised way. None of this is a coincidence. It's the mind trying to confirm if you still exist outside of it. This is where the principle of avoiding being hated comes in. You didn't provoke, you didn't expose, you didn't humiliate. The pain is silent, not aggressive. This preserves his appearance of virtue. At the same time, you become difficult to forget, because it didn't leave behind any messy emotional trails. He fell silent, and silence echoes. But this echo at some point forces a painful reassessment. Once the ghostly presence settles in, something begins to change in tone. Their minds are tired of going in circles. The discomfort ceases to be mere curiosity and becomes genuine unease. This is where the reassessment comes in. They begin to look back with less fantasy and more honesty. Machiavelli understood that true power only emerges when self-deception fails. Gradually, they realized that his absence was not random. It was a consequence of ignored standards, of excessive comfort, for having taken his presence for granted. This moment hurts because it breaks down internal defenses. The narrative of myth no longer sustains everything. Some memories are starting to feel different. Small gestures from you take on new value, and the silence, once irritating, begins to seem coherent. An important shift occurs here. They stop asking, "Why did he disappear?" And they start asking, "What did I miss?" This change is brutal for the ego, because it shifts the focus from the other person to oneself. Machiavelli would call this the collapse of the appearance of virtue. It's no longer enough to just appear correct. We need to face the real impact of our own actions. They remind you of times when you gave in too much, of times when you were there even when you weren't needed. And they realize that they confused constancy with weakness. This is where the principle that it is better to be feared than loved comes in, without hatred. Because respect is born from the perception of value. Value is only noticed when it is lost. This realization comes too late. Here's a common example. When someone only realizes the importance of a partner after the breakup. Not because love has increased, but because the absence reorganized perception. This is politics guided by reality, not by ideals in action. The ideal says it will always be here. Reality shows that nothing is guaranteed. They begin to feel guilty, But not that dramatic kind of guilt. It's a silent, mature guilt. The feeling that something valuable has been mismanaged. You taught that without saying anything. He used calculated force by withdrawing at the right time. He didn't beg, he didn't threaten. He left with dignity, and now they see the cost of it. This reassessment sets the stage for the final confrontation, the mirror. After the reassessment, there's nowhere left to run. Distractions no longer work. Narratives no longer protect us. What remains is the encounter with one's own reflection. They begin to wonder not about you, but about themselves. Why does this always happen to me? Why do important people end up drifting away? Machiavelli understood that the true conflict is internal. When the enemy ceases to be external, the game changes. Here, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, prevails. It's not about moral guilt, it's about behavioral patterns. They notice cycles repeating themselves, similar relationships, similar endings. And for the first time, the absence doesn't hurt because of you. It hurts because of what she reveals. This mirror is cruel because it doesn't accuse, it only shows. It shows excessive comfort, carelessness, and predictability. It shows how they confuse constant presence with obligation. Here, the ego's last defense crumbles. The appearance of virtue no longer convinces even themselves. They realize they didn't lose you by accident. They lost because they didn't know how to sustain value. Machiavelli would say that they ignored virtù and trusted too much in fortuna. They believed that everything would remain the same without maintenance. But nothing of value survives silent contempt. This is a difficult time because it demands responsibility. Not the spoken kind, but the felt kind. They realized they weren't victims, they were careless, and that perception changes everything. This is where learning takes hold. Even without direct contact, you become a benchmark for boundaries, not for their absence. No speeches, no explanations, simply by leaving at the right time. This is the calculated use of force in its most refined form. You didn't need to humiliate anyone to teach them a lesson. He didn't need to shout to make his point. He simply withdrew his own loyal armies, and he let the empty lot speak for itself. This mirror doesn't lie because it doesn't judge. It simply reflects patterns that have always been there. Some people learn from this. Others repeat the cycle with new people. But no one emerges unscathed from this confrontation. And when someone loses you like that, they never forget you in the same way again. Now that you understand what really happens when you disappear without explanation, the question is no longer whether this works. It's how you're going to use this knowledge. Because knowing that absence reorganizes value changes how you position yourself in relationships, business, and even how you present yourself to the world. How many times have you been too available, over-explained, given in too much, and lost strength because of it? Machiavelli wasn't talking about gratuitous cruelty, but about constant adaptability and decisions based on real human nature. The invitation here is not to become cold, but to stop being predictable, to learn how to withdraw your own loyal armies when the terrain ceases to be forgiving. To understand that avoiding being hated doesn't mean erasing yourself, and that an appearance of virtue without a stance only makes you disposable. So reflect. In which areas of your life do you need to stop explaining and start repositioning yourself? Where can silence speak louder than any speech? And who would you become if you stopped begging for emotional closure and started choosing the right moment to leave? If you found this content helpful, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here we talk about power, psychology, and strategy without romanticizing it, without cliches, and without illusions. Because those who understand the game don't react, they anticipate it.